Arthur Bennett ignored his father's calls for nearly 40 years. Then one afternoon, a nurse left a voicemail with a sentence that would lead him to hear 6 words he would never forget. Those 6 words changed the rest of his life. And when I first heard this story from Arthur himself, sitting across from him at a diner in a small Ohio town, I realized they might change yours too. Arthur was the kind of man who made peace look easy. 72 years old, white hair swept back neatly, deep wrinkles carved into a face that had spent decades outdoors. He wore a faded flannel shirt the color of pine trees, and his kind blue eyes had a way of looking at you like he was measuring something invisible. He had retired from 28 years of working for a county water authority, never married, lived alone in a house at the edge of Millfield, population 4,000 and shrinking. He kept a vegetable garden in the back. He walked his neighbor's dog on Thursdays. By every measure, Arthur Bennett was a man who had settled into his life. But beneath that calm surface was a grief he had carried so long he had almost forgotten its name. The trouble between Arthur and his father, Raymond Bennett, had started before Arthur was old enough to fully understand it. Raymond was a man of silences and sudden storms, a factory worker who came home tired and left his hurt where everyone could step on it. Arthur remembered a childhood of walking on eggshells, of muffled arguments through thin walls, of a mother who made herself small to keep the peace. By the time Arthur was 17, he had made a decision without realizing it. He was building a wall. Every small slight, every missed birthday, every cold word was another brick. By his mid-20s, the wall was finished. And on the morning of his 29th birthday, when Raymond didn't call, didn't write, didn't acknowledge that his son existed, Arthur decided the wall would stand forever. He was done. He told himself he felt nothing. He almost believed it. The years passed the way they do when you stop paying attention to them. Arthur moved 3 times, changed jobs twice, watched friends get married and have children and grow older. He sent his mother Christmas cards until she passed. He kept the address but never drove there. Raymond Bennett existed in Arthur's mind the way a scar exists on skin, not painful anymore, just permanently there, a reminder of something that had once been raw. Mutual acquaintances would mention Raymond occasionally. He was still in the old house. He'd had some health problems. Arthur would nod and change the subject. He was not cruel about it. He simply treated his father the way you treat a closed chapter. Something read, understood, finished. What Arthur didn't realize was that some chapters close us before we close them. It was a Tuesday in late October when the voicemail arrived. Arthur almost didn't listen to it. He didn't recognize the number, and he was in the middle of watching a baseball game. But something made him press play. A woman's voice, professionally calm, introduced herself as a nurse at a hospice facility outside Columbus. She said Raymond Bennett had been admitted 3 weeks earlier with late-stage heart failure. She said Raymond had asked, several times, if Arthur had called. She paused on the recording, just a half second, and then she said, "Mr. Bennett, your father is asking for you. He doesn't have much time." Arthur sat with the phone in his hand for a long time. The baseball game kept playing. He didn't hear any of it. He almost didn't go. That's the part Arthur was most honest about when he told me this story. He sat with it for 2 days. He made lists in his head. The arguments, the silences, the accumulated weight of everything Raymond had failed to be. Who owed whom an apology? Whether it even mattered after 40 years. Whether sitting at the bedside of a dying man made up for a lifetime of distance. He called his closest friend, a man named Gene, and Gene said something simple. "You're not going for him, Arthur. You're going for yourself." Arthur packed a small bag on a Thursday morning. He drove 4 hours without the radio on. His hands were steady on the wheel, but somewhere behind his ribs, something he'd kept locked for decades had started to stir. The hospice facility smelled like antiseptic and something floral trying to cover it. A young nurse led Arthur down a hallway lined with small framed prints of pastoral scenes, fields and rivers and trees in autumn color. Arthur noticed every detail the way people notice things when they are nervous. Room 14. The door was half open. He pushed it gently and saw his father for the first time in 39 years. Raymond Bennett was smaller than Arthur remembered. The man who had seemed so enormous in Arthur's childhood memory was now 81 years old and narrow against the white sheets, his breathing slow and audible. But he turned his head when Arthur stepped in, and something moved across the old man's face. Not surprise, exactly. Something closer to relief. They talked for 3 days, not continuously. Raymond slept often, and Arthur would sit in the chair by the window, watching the parking lot below, thinking. But when Raymond was awake, they talked. Carefully at first, the way people talk when they are walking on ice. Raymond didn't make excuses. Arthur noticed that. He didn't explain away the years of coldness or the failures of fatherhood. He asked questions instead. About Arthur's life. About his work, his home, his days. He asked about Arthur's mother with a tenderness that surprised Arthur. He asked if Arthur had been happy. That question landed somewhere deep, and Arthur found he didn't have a quick answer for it. Had he been happy? He had been fine. He had been okay. He had been, for a very long time, carefully okay. On the second day, Raymond told Arthur something he hadn't known. Something that reframed everything. Raymond reached slowly into the drawer of the bedside table and produced a shoebox, old, the corners soft with age. Inside were letters. Dozens of them, in envelopes, all addressed to Arthur at various addresses over the decades. None of them had ever been sent. Raymond held the shoebox with both hands and said, "I wrote to you every year. I just never knew how to finish them. I never knew what to say that would be enough." Arthur took the box and held it in his lap. He understood something then that no argument, no therapy, no amount of reasoning had ever shown him. His father had not been indifferent. He had been afraid. Afraid in the same suffocating way that Arthur himself had been afraid. Afraid of getting it wrong, afraid of rejection, afraid that the wall had been up so long that nothing could breach it. They had both been waiting for the other to go first. And nearly 40 years had slipped through that silence. On the third morning, Raymond was noticeably weaker. The nurse said it was close. Arthur sat beside the bed and held his father's hand. The first time he realized that he could ever remember holding his father's hand. Raymond drifted in and out. Once, he opened his eyes and looked at Arthur for a long time without speaking, and Arthur felt something release in his chest, slow and irreversible, like ice melting in a fist. He didn't cry right then. He would cry later, alone in the car, on the highway home, with the kind of force that only comes from decades of unfelt feeling finally reaching the surface. But in that room, he was simply present. For the first time in nearly 40 years, Arthur Bennett was fully, completely present with his father. Raymond's eyes opened one final time in the early afternoon. He found Arthur's face, and he held it in his gaze with a steadiness that seemed to gather all his remaining strength. His lips moved, Arthur leaned close. And Raymond Bennett, who had spent a lifetime struggling to say what mattered, said 6 words in a voice barely above a whisper. 6 words, that was all. "Don't waste it like I did." Arthur pulled back and looked at his father. Raymond was still watching him. And then very slowly he closed his eyes. He passed quietly 2 hours later, with Arthur still sitting beside him. Arthur drove home in a different silence than the one he'd driven there in. The shoebox of unsent letters was on the passenger seat. He kept reaching over and touching the lid without opening it. When he told me this story months later, he said, "Those 6 words did something nothing else had managed to do in 72 years. They made me stop seeing my time as something I had. They made me see it as something I was spending." He thought about all the things he had postponed. The friendships maintained at a distance. The conversations he had avoided. The walls he had kept standing out of habit long after the original wound had healed. He thought about every version of himself that had chosen careful over present, safe over alive. And he thought about Raymond's shoebox. All those unsent letters, all that love that had never made it out of the drawer. Here is what Arthur told me he learned, and what I believe is worth carrying out of this story. Estrangement is rarely about not caring. More often, it is about two people who care deeply and have no idea how to say so, both waiting for the other to go first, both convinced the gap is too wide to cross. But gaps are crossed every day by ordinary people who simply decide to move first. Arthur also learned something about the nature of time. We speak of wasting time as though it is a failure of productivity. But Raymond's last words pointed at something deeper. The waste of time is not in rest or leisure or silence. The waste is in living behind walls. The waste is in keeping distance as a strategy for avoiding pain, when the distance itself becomes the pain. We postpone the conversations, we postpone the forgiveness. We postpone the reaching out. And one day someone leaves us a voicemail, and we realize that the gap we were protecting ourselves from has become the thing we grieve most. Arthur tended his garden the following spring with the shoebox on the porch beside him. He read every letter. He said it took him most of a week. He said it was the most painful and the most healing thing he had ever done, to hear his father's voice on those pages, struggling toward him year after year, never quite reaching. He said he understood, finally, that love and expression are not the same thing. That you can carry love silently for decades and still leave someone starving for it. Don't wait for the voicemail. Don't wait for the hospice room. Don't wait until 6 words in a fading voice become the most important thing anyone ever said to you. The people in your life are not permanent. The time you have with them is not guaranteed. The conversations you keep postponing are the ones you will mourn most. Arthur Bennett's father left him one final gift in those last words. Not guilt, but permission. Permission to stop wasting it. Whatever it means to you, a relationship, a dream, a long overdue phone call. Stop waiting. Don't waste it. You already know what you need to do.